Hello, welcome everybody. Okay, please stand and enjoy the singing of the national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave for the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Thank you, Joseph.
Thank you.
And now we'd like to welcome Pam Lau, President of Parkland College, for the welcome.
Good morning. On behalf of the Parkland Board of Trustees and the faculty and staff of Parkland College, I wish to extend a very warm welcome to each and every one of you, to our guests, and especially to the veterans who are with us today. We are gathered this morning to honor all those who have served in the military. Regardless of the length of your time in the service, we want to say thank you. You chose to wear a uniform. You chose to put your life on the line so that you can help defend the freedoms that we have as Americans. You took an oath to defend the Constitution and in so doing to protect our nation and us. Your willingness to serve, your courage, and your commitment to serve on our behalf are more than deeply appreciated. 135 years ago, it was 1919, probably before most of us were born, President Woodrow Wilson proclaimed November the 11th as the first commemoration of what was then called Armistice Day. And this is what he said. To us in America, the reflections of Armistice Day will be filled with solemn pride in the heroism of those who died in the country's service and with gratitude for the victory, both because of the thing from which it has freed us and because of the opportunity it has given America to show her sympathy with peace and justice in the councils of the nations. The original concept for this day, to honor America's veterans, included a brief suspension of business beginning at 11 a.m., hence our choice of scheduling today's commemoration at this very hour, 11/11/11. President Woodrow Wilson's proclamation builds upon what President George Washington had astutely observed much earlier. And this is what President Washington said: "The willingness with which our young people are likely to serve in any war, no matter how justified, shall be directly proportional to how they perceived the veterans of earlier wars were treated and appreciated by their nation. And for today, if you pay at all any attention to the news headlines, you will see that they tell us that the world we live in is one where there is so much turmoil, where wars are constantly being fought. So President Ronald Reagan's sober observation remains timely and true. And this is what he said: "Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same. Or one day, we will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it once was like in the United States when men were free." And this is why Veterans Day remains important. So to all, especially for those who have served in the military, happy Veterans Day. We want to thank you for your unwavering commitment to our nation. Your sacrifices are not forgotten, and we are ever grateful for your service. And thanks to each and every one of you for joining us today, and thanks to the Student Veterans Association here at Parkland for planning today's ceremony.
Good morning. My name is Maurice Taylor. I'm a Navy veteran. I'm going to give the presentation of veterans and orders of service. When I name the veterans service, will you please stand up so you can be acknowledged? Thank you. U.S. Air Force. Thank you, Air Force. Next, we have the U.S. Army. Next, we have the fine U.S. Coast Guard. If you know the song, feel free to sing along. All right, next we have the fine U.S. Marines. Yeah. Last but not least, without bias, is the U.S. Navy. Anchors away. Thank you. We want to thank all veterans, here and not here, for all their services and the good things they do in communities around the world. Thank you. All right. We have a great speaker here today. His name is Jim Voiles. Jim Voiles was raised in a farm in northern Macoupin County and attended Verdon schools. He received his undergraduate degree from Murray State and his postgraduate degrees from Western Illinois University, University of Illinois Southern, and Eastern Illinois University. Jim served as an English teacher and a coach and an administrator in Decatur schools over an 8-year span. For 4 years, he was assistant principal of only East Richland High School before becoming principal of Tuscola High School. After 4 years of principal, he was appointed Tuscola Superintendent of Schools, a position he held for 15 years until he retired in 2003. In 2004 and 2005, he served as an intern superintendent of Villa Grove Schools. And in 2010, he was recalled as intern superintendent in Tuscola Schools, which he held for 1 year. As an Army officer, he served in Vietnam as an artillery forward observer with an infantry company and later as an artillery platoon leader. He received various medals, including a Bronze Star 5, device for ground combat, and an Air Medal for aerial combat, and an Army Commendation Medal, and also various numerous campaign medals. Mr. Voiles was elected to the Board of Trustees, Parkland, in 2016. He and his wife, Dorothy, reside in Tuscola, Illinois. Can we have a big hand for Mr. Voiles?
Thank you. I do not have a prepared speech, but rather when I do speak, I talk about various episodes that I recall and go through as it comes to me. But I will start off with my growing up, which you talked about in Macoupin County, Verdon, Illinois. Lived on a farm between Verdon and Girard and spent a lot of time working in the fields and baling hay and putting the hay in the barn the old way. And it was grueling work, but it never prepared me for what I was going to get into later on. From Verdon, I went to Murray State, and at that time, it was required that all able-bodied males be a part of ROTC, Army ROTC, for 2 years. And that I did. And by the time I got to the end of that 2 years, I elected to join the Advanced Corps, which meant when I graduated, I would be immediately commissioned a second lieutenant in the Army. And the Vietnam War was going on, and I figured, well, I'll probably be involved in that one way or the other. And so I went through that process, was commissioned on graduation day. I asked for 3 months off after graduation. The Army was very obliging. To the day, 3 months later, I got orders, and the orders were for 90 days TDY service to Fort Sill, Oklahoma for artillery school, and then reassignment to something called USARV. And I didn't know what that, there's full of a lot of acronyms in my orders, which I got about 40 copies of it, as you remember. And it meant the United States Army, Republic of Vietnam. I found an old World War II veteran to interpret most of it for me. And when I got there, half of the class were Marines, were Marine officers. They trained the Marine officers in artillery. And so I learned how they presented how to adjust artillery and aim and fire the guns, and to understand that. It had no well, aiming and firing the guns had a context in Vietnam, but adjusting the artillery had no context there. They couldn't replicate anything at Fort Sill except have the guns. So I ended up going to Vietnam, probably the fastest route, 90 days. I had my basic training was done 2 years earlier at a place, an obscure place you've never heard of, Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania. You've heard of that?
Yep.
And then I, Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania, that was a place. Brought other memories to my mind. But anyway, ended up going to Vietnam and picked up an assignment there to the 1st Cavalry Division, what they call the Air Cav, famous for the movie like We Were Soldiers Once and Young, and all helicopter. And I can remember the day that I finally worked my way to my assignment. I went out to A Battery, 1st to the 77th Artillery, who I was assigned to, and immediately detached to Charlie Company, 1st to the 12th Cavalry Combat Regiment, operating somewhere along the Cambodian border. And so I hopped a helicopter on their logistic or log day, flew out on that single helicopter with a bunch of bags of supplies, and it landed, I was looking, it landed in a creek bottom after blowing the trees away. And I got out and saw nothing. And then when I finally got off the creek, I saw guys moving around. And I went to one of them and said, "Where's your company commander at?" And he pointed over some direction. And I went over there and met Michael Christie, who was the company commander. And I told him I had been assigned as his new forward observer. My job as forward observer is when the company came into contact on their missions, was to call in artillery support and to call in helicopter gunships, and on a rare occasion assist in the adjustment of jet strikes, which were rare in our area because of the jungle. And it was dense jungle, and it was what they called a free fire zone. Nobody was there except us and the North Vietnamese regular soldiers. There were no villages. I look back on that, and I'm grateful that there were no villages to deal with or people. The only non-military people in those areas, because that was along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, were the Montagnards. And you didn't see them unless they wanted you to see them. They were the Aboriginal tribesmen who actually fought with the Americans a lot because they didn't like the Vietnamese in general, I don't think. But so that was my role with them. I learned OJT, on-the-job training for the most part, and how to adjust artillery by sound rather than sight. And adjusting in a dense jungle is difficult, but it's something that you can master after a while, something they couldn't teach at Fort Sill. I served in Vietnam for 10 and a half months before I was medevaced to Japan. I suffered a couple of leg injuries, and they weren't wounds, they were combat injuries. And most of it had to do with jumping out of first cav helicopters with a 70-pound pack or more on your back. It's not aerodynamic. And when the helicopters would come in, sometimes they would, to what was quote unquote a clearing, they'd get there and there might be elephant grass up 5 or 6 or more feet. And they didn't want to hang there in the air, and we didn't want to hang there in the air, so out you went. But, you know, I would say 85 to 90% of the landings, it was truly a clearing, and they could scoot in and scoot out. I always went in on the on the first sortie of helicopters to the landing zone to provide artillery support, and my recon sergeant always left on the last to provide artillery support. Sometimes they like to hit where they know they're at and wait until the last sortie, and the enemy would attack the last sortie going out. Mentioned in there that I got an air medal for every, in the first cav, for every, I believe it was 25 combat air assaults, air to ground. For every 25, you got an air medal. I don't know how many I accumulated, but I got credit for at least one. And but anyway, I got medevaced after a while. Well, before that, I because of my injuries, I went back to the guns. One step back to the forward fire base. And I do need to make a point how grueling, I said it was grueling. When I went out to the field, we were in the jungle day after day for 21 to 28 days, depending on how many companies were in the infantry battalion of the fire base that was supporting us. Because we would rotate in after 21 or 28 days for 7 days of security for the fire base, which is our rest and relaxation, was lining a bunker on the forward area of the battle areas. And then we would go back out again into the jungle, carrying everything that we needed to have to eat. I carried 11 quarts of water in my pack. That's about 22 pounds. Because my radio man, I had 2 radio men, and because they were carrying a heavy radio in their pack, I carried extra water. Just never wanted to run out of water. You could run out of food, but you never wanted to run out of water. And that's part of the aerodynamic problem that I had. But I went to Camp Zama, Japan for 2 weeks for assessments. Then I was medevaced, ending up in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, where I had surgery. After a period of a couple of months, I was released from the hospital. And since I was a senior lieutenant, I was assigned responsibility for 12 ranges down Range Road at Fort Leonard Wood. Most of them, all of them had to do with training recruits to shoot an M16. first to zero it, then to do range targets, and then do target detection. So I spent about 8 months to 9 months teaching basic rifle marksmanship with an M16. And then I elected to be discharged. They offered me a captaincy if I would re-up, but I had no assurances where I would go. And I decided to go to English graduate school at Western Illinois University. And that was my beginning into education. I want to tell you another remembrance that I have, and that's of my mother. She was born in 1917. And I guess when she was about 8 years old, this old man come to live with an aunt just up the street from her mother, my grandmother. The aunt hosted this old guy from Kansas, and my mother always regretted that she didn't take the time to get to know him. And he was an old guy that was pretty stoic, too. And he didn't volunteer a lot, apparently, according to her. And he wasn't one of those that mollycoddled grandchildren either. Plus, there were others there, and she was the youngest of the group. But she always regretted that because on growing older and growing up, she realized that, in fact, she should have, because he was a Civil War veteran. He served in Company K of the 63rd Indiana Infantry that went down the Mississippi with Grant. He was under Sherman, and to all the conquests that went along there. And then I guess he split off with Sherman in the March to the Sea. And eventually he was discharged in Greensboro, North Carolina in 65, I believe it was. Yes, he came to visit for a period of time, and then he went back to Kansas, where he died and buried at Camp Butler. I just bring that up because he's my great-grandfather. I just bring that up because you're at a point in time where there's very few World War II veterans left. And there's dwindling numbers of Korean War veterans who've had those experiences. And Vietnam veterans are headed that way. When you have the opportunity to see, a rare opportunity to see a World War II veteran, go up to him. I don't care if you know him or not, and talk to him. Same thing with Korean War veterans. Don't have the same regrets that my mother had. In closing, and this is a prepared speech, I guess, because I don't want to mess anything up. I want to tell you what I go back to every Veterans Day, every Memorial Day. It's the same thing. It comes to my mind intensely. It's about Jim Downs. He's from was from Tony, Alabama. His name is listed on panel 13 West, row 91 of the wall in Washington, D.C. It was late in the afternoon on March the 7th, 1970, and Charlie Company had just stopped to set up our night defensive perimeter after moving all day on a very barely visible jungle trail. And I can still see that in my mind, and how tired everyone was, and just totally worn out. The night position straddled the trail that we were following. Lieutenant Freed, 3rd Platoon, had just left to sweep the jungle to our left flank for any enemy. So we were down to 2 platoons when a column of enemy soldiers walked into our perimeter machine gun positions. It was a surprise to all of us that this happened. They weren't expecting us on a new trail that they had made, and we weren't expecting them. A battle broke out. Bullets were flying everywhere, and I called in an artillery strike, as well as calling the Cobra gunships. We called that Bouncing Max. Its name was the Blue Max, and that was her call sign. So I bounced Max. At one point, I was ordered to bring the artillery into danger close by the infantry battalion commander through our liaison. And that is bringing it into approximately 50 meters. And that's 105 howitzers. That's pretty close. You don't even hear it coming. You don't even hear the sound of it coming until it hits at that distance. As I lie talking on the radio, Jimmy Downs, who was within 10 feet of me, assisting with a machine gun, was hit in the neck. 2 platoon medics exposed themselves to try to stop the flow of blood from Jimmy's neck, but could not. With complete knowledge that he was about to die and certain in his faith, Jimmy crossed himself and said the Lord's Prayer. Within seconds, he lay dead on the jungle floor over 8,000 miles from his home in Tony, Alabama. Jimmy Downs was the first American soldier I saw die in battle. Each Memorial Day and Veterans Day, I play that scene over and over in my mind. And have never been able to forget it. It'll always become a kind of tribute to the memory of Jimmy Downs. May Jimmy and all those veterans who died defending the flag rest in peace and be remembered and respected. And on this special day, may all veterans be recognized and thanked for their service. May God bless our veterans and bless this country. Thank you.
Oh, all right. Let me get this thing back on. Thank you, Mr. Rouse. That was very touching. All right, we're going to take a moment of silence for our lost veterans who are not here presently, so please take a moment of silence, please. Thank you. Next, we're going to have Lisa Costello giving closing remarks. Lisa, thank you.
Thank you. I just have a few short remarks. If you're familiar with the Gertz Gallery, you know that we serve as a platform to exhibit contemporary art. We're a learning laboratory for our students and our community. So it's vital that we show and host programming that features professional artists in addition to our well-established student exhibitions. As a community resource, we enable our faculty to utilize the gallery for instructional use, allow our students and community to experience and explore works of art up close and in person, and hear artists speak about their processes, careers, and their artistic journeys. This exhibition accomplishes these goals. We were really delighted to have this show come to the Gertz Gallery. It's called Experiencing Veterans and Artists Collaboration, and it involved a group of faculty from Tiffin University who had a veteran in one of their classes, and it inspired them to talk to him because he didn't feel really welcome with all of these 18-year-olds. And so it turned into this process of interviewing veterans from a variety of all sorts of walks of life, branches of the military, record those interviews, and then invite artists to make a work in response to that artwork, so their stories. And so on the walls you can see the stories of the veterans, and then you can see the work that was inspired by that. But the process was really fascinating because in interviewing the veterans, they wanted to make sure that they were happy with the artwork. So if the artwork wasn't approved of by the veteran, it wasn't exhibited. And now we have 29 works in our show, but it's traveling all over the country, and there are at least, I think, 70 artists participating in this project, and it continues to grow. So the veteran was able to keep one of the works, and then the artist kept a work, and then the rest traveled. And so it's been a really wonderful success. We just had our high school art seminar come through, and all of those high school students reading those stories really connected them to the veterans. So kind of like listening to Mr. Voyle speak, it really bridges the gap between civilians and veterans, and that's what this exhibition was all about. So on behalf of the gallery, I'd like to thank the veterans for their service. I'd also like to thank Donna Gertz and her husband Fred for their continued support, and our community members in Parkland, students, faculty, and staff, and our administration who supports our gallery and exhibition programming. It really helps us fulfill our mission. We also appreciate the continued support from the Illinois Arts Council. So I hope that you're able to take a little bit of time to see the exhibition. I know it's quite moving to read those stories. We're open tomorrow as well. And then I wanted to say that the EVAC project has its own website, so you can take your time and look at that as well. So thank you so much for coming. I'll be in the gallery if anybody has any questions, and we have coffee and some desserts if anybody's interested. So thank you so much.